The November 16th, 2021 meeting of the White Bear Lake Conservation District Board to order. We have a quorum, so that takes care of the first couple items on the agenda. I'm just going to make a couple of quick announcements. One is that Alan isn't here tonight because he was exposed to COVID, and he just wasn't sure if he was carrying or not, or contagious. And then Kim is also not here tonight for a similar reason. Okay. So we're on to the next item, which is approval of the agenda. Does anybody have any changes that they would like to make to the agenda? Okay. I would like to make some. I'd like to add under new business. And can everybody hear me if I just keep this on? Is that okay? Yeah, nice. So under new business, I would like to add I have a few points that I would like to discuss based on a meeting that we had with the City of White Bear Lake, and I would just like to add these items under new business as a general discussion of general discussion of commercial bay items. Okay, any other items or changes that we would like to see? Okay. Would anybody like to make a motion?
So moved.
I move to approve.
Second.
Okay, well, we've got at least one motion, or at least a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Next item is approval of the meeting minutes from our October 19th meeting. And does anybody have any adjustments they'd like to make on those? Mike?
Item 10 on the second page, the third bullet down, it says Phragmites survey treatment, blah, blah, blah. The cost was $976 invoiced from Lake Management,
Okay.
not McComas. Lake Management. Paid by Anoka County. That's it.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Does anybody like to make a motion?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the October minutes. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes. Okay, public comments. We reserve 15 minutes on the agenda for anybody that would like to speak on any items that aren't on the agenda. And would anybody like to take advantage of that 15 minutes? Okay, we'll move on. New business. So the first item under new business is a report by Steve McComas. So let's just jump right into that, Steve.
All right. Good evening, everybody.
And just before you start, Steve, or while you're passing out, Mike, would you want to do a little introduction for Steve?
Well, for the
In your mic, please.
Thank you.
first,
In
and
your
anybody,
mic. Oh, yeah, there you go.
for the new board members and anybody who doesn't know Steve McComas, he
I've
is
got one to fix, Steve.
also known as the Lake Doctor. He's also a champion amateur boxer. Don't get him riled. And he goes on lakes in Wisconsin and Minnesota, everywhere, solving problems, answering questions, giving projected views on how things should work and how they should be treated. And he's a really good person to work with, very knowledgeable. And we have him captive tonight. So go for it, Steve.
Thank you for those kind words, Mike. Of course, I'm pretty lucky to have Mike help me on the Eurasian milfoil delineation and keeps on feeding me great ideas as well. The whole staff for over the years have been very helpful and very supportive. So thanks a lot for that. What I thought I might do is just kind of go through. I just handed out kind of a summary of this, of the report. This last year we did a couple things. We went and looked at Eurasian milfoil in the lake, and then we went, treated it, or an applicator treated it, and then we went and assessed it, And then we also look for starry stonewort, another aquatic invasive species. So I thought I'd just take a couple minutes, go through some of the highlights, and I'll just use page numbers here. So the better map for our delineation is on page 2. So what we do is we go around the entire lake. Do I need to stand in front of this thing?
Oh, yeah,
Okay, good.
but it's wireless, so you can take it up and carry it if you want.
All right. Yeah, that's. I'll. Sometimes I haven't. Okay, thanks. But here's what we do. We go around the lake. All those little black dots are samples with rakes. Mike Peranto has been out on the lake. He goes, I got a pretty good idea where some of the areas are of milfoil, and you should be looking here and there. We sample these sites. We sampled over 780 sites on July 1st. Milfoil was coming in a little bit later this year than usual for whatever reason, but it was over the whole region. But 780 sites, and when we found milfoil that was within a couple feet of the surface or had a high density on the rake, we'd mark that as a red circle. And then when we got all done, we kind of circled up the areas where we had a lot of colored dots. And that's how we delineated areas for treatment. So this year, we treated 50.53 acres, which was up from last year, but not an all-time high. So it was treated, the lake was treated, and we came back to see it was treated on July 15th. So we delineated July 1st, it was treated July 15th. We came back about a month later in August to see how good was the treatment, was it effective, and did we miss anything? Was there any milfoil that we missed? So on page 3 is our assessment. Mike Peranto has had an excellent idea. Like farming, we don't want to treat a field or a lake with the same herbicide year after year. We'll build up some resistance. And that's what they're finding across the country. Some of this milfoil is no longer being controlled as well as it has been in the past. It has built up some resistance. So what we're doing is we're treating half the lake with one herbicide brand and the other side of the lake with another herbicide brand. Different herbicides, and then kind of rotate those from year to year so that we don't keep hitting the same areas and the same milfoil with the same herbicide. And it looks like it's been pretty effective. Because if you look at our results here on page 3, very few red dots. And so we treated the east side of the lake with a herbicide called Triclopyr, which is a broad spectrum systemic herbicide. We treated the other side, the west side of the lake, with 2,4-D, pretty standard. It's been used in a lot of lakes for a lot of years. But the good news is the results were very effective. We did not have hardly any nuisance Eurasian milfoil in big continuous beds or matting at the surface. So that was a successful year and a successful treatment. Page 4 just kind of summarizes herbicide use over the years. It showed up, milfoil first showed up in 1988. Remember, Lake Minnetonka was the first lake in the state with milfoil, showed up in 1987, and wasn't far after that it showed up in White Bear Lake. So you can see treatment through the years, and a little graph over on to the right of that. For about a period of 10 to 15 years, milfoil treatments were pretty low, usually less than 20 acres a year. Lake levels went down a little bit, more sunlight coming down, reaching areas that hadn't reached before. We had a little bump in Eurasian milfoil. You can see since about it's a little bit blurry there. But if you look over on the chart, about 2012 was when we had the big year. And since then, we've been treating kind of a heavy year of milfoil growth and kind of a lighter year. Comes back, we treat it a little bit heavier the next year. But there's an overall decline, which kind of mimics to a degree lake levels too. Last year we only treated in 2020, we only treated 12 acres. Last year, 2021, we treated 50 acres, and that's reflected there in that graph. What we have been finding too over time, and that's on the next page, page 5. Look at the pattern there. You can see that some of these beds of Eurasian milfoil have been pretty persistent. And that is, milfoil doesn't grow over the entire lake, but it shows up more often than not in a number of areas that would total about 60 acres if we looked at all the persistent beds of Eurasian milfoil. So what we've done here from 2012 to 2021, or 2021, we have just put all our treatment polygons, they're called, on top of each other. And that's how we get this kind of a hotspot map. So you can see in the North Basin there's been a few acres of persistent growth. Not too much in the Southeast Basin, but that one shoreline has a number of acres. And then in Commercial Bay, there's been a few areas where it's been somewhat persistent, but not the whole bay. The whole bay actually could support milfoil growth, but it doesn't. So that's kind of nice. So we'll keep tracking that. Helps us kind of zero in, gives us an idea. Next year, we are looking at probably a little bit of an off year. If the pattern continues, kind of heavy growth, light growth, heavy growth, light growth, we're due for a lighter growth next year. Maybe not quite the whole 50 acres, but a lot of that depends on winter conditions, ice out, and water clarity and things like that. One other thing that we've done is looking for starry stonewort, which is an invasive species. It looks very much like Cara. Cara is a native plant. It's kind of a macroalgae. And on page 6, typically we're finding it's only in about 15, 16 lakes in the state, and typically it's been coming in at public accesses. This is where it's first found. So that's why we zero in on those areas. So we looked at the Ramsey County access, Mataska, and the VFW access. And we used rake sampling and visual observations, and we sampled 50, 60 sites per access. And at this point, we haven't found any starry stonewort in White Bear. It is present in Medicine Lake, and that's about the only metro lake right now, but that could be a spreading source or source of future starry stonewort spread. So we want to keep our eyes open. I am working on a starry stonewort lake up in Stearns County. That's Coronis, Lake Coronis. They're treating 100, 150 acres a year. So under right conditions, it can really take off. And they're treating it twice, in some areas 3 times a year. So we just soon keep starry stonewort and the potential for some of that problem growth at a minimum. I'm also working on 4 lakes where starry stonewort was found very early at the public access, and they've treated less than an acre. It's been going on 5 years now. So if it's found early, it looks like you can contain it. We have yet to eliminate it, though, from a lake. But 1 acre a year isn't so bad compared to the possibility of 100 or more acres if it's not really kind of controlled and contained. And then just for some background, page 7 is a page of some water quality. We can kind of see that there's been the top graph is the Secchi disc. That's a measure of clarity. And the longer that red line, the deeper the Secchi disc is, and that means the clarity is better as well. You can see in the last few years, kind of coinciding with zebra mussels, we've always had good water clarity in White Bear. In the last few years, it's been even better. The nutrient averages and the algae averages, which are represented by chlorophyll, are in that table below. They're also excellent. So the water quality in White Bear is excellent from the standpoint of what they call our trophic indicators, our phosphorus, clarity, and chlorophyll. So that's good news as well. Of course, with clear water, the native plants also respond. So there's some native plant growth as well, a little bit more abundant maybe than it has been compared to pre-zebra mussels. The last page, page 8, just a nice little summary. We tallied up and graphed up all the points from the DNR website on lake levels going back to 1924. I think there's about 13,000. So the lake levels have been checked regularly, daily basically, and you can see the trends from the lowest all-timer, which was about 2010 or so, coming back up to last year or two. Last year, lake levels took a little bit of a dip, but they took a dip across the state, basically a drought condition. So that's about typical. We'll see how that rebounds now. We probably can still use some snow, and if we get out of this rain shadow and get our fair share of precipitation, lake levels will probably respond as well. You can see some pictures. We were doing remember back in 1999, we were doing some lake use studies. So we were out counting boats and things like that. And I just started taking pictures. Took a picture of the shoreline, really to kind of show boat traffic, but it also shows lake levels. And then from 1999, 2012, kind of the low point, same area, a little bit different look, and then the lake coming back in 2019 and dipping just a bit in 2021. So that's kind of a quick overview of lake levels as well. And with that, we've covered the milfoil and starry stonewort, some water quality, a little bit on lake levels. But I'm open to questions on any topic.
Does anybody have any questions for Steve? Meredith?
So I read in your report that the milfoil likes to grow where there's more nitrogen in the sediment in the sand. What is our main source of nitrogen getting into the lake?
I think it's probably natural. And that is, nitrogen is present in aquatic plants and any plants. And as those plants die back, sometimes they will leave nitrogen behind as well, especially in the Commercial Bay area. Back in 1922, there was a publication they were taking out truckloads of aquatic plants. That's always been a very fertile bay. And so some of the nitrogen is natural. Probably has been some from residential runoff as well, but luckily for White Bear, it's a small watershed. There isn't much drainage coming into the lake, and also over the decades, there hasn't been much farming. And so farming close up to the shoreline or with drainage ditches feeding right into the lake, those often are sources of nitrogen as well. For example, Bald Eagle has probably a little bit bigger watershed, had a few more farms, had a few more drainage ditches running into the lake as well. It has a little bit more nitrogen than White Bear, although White Bear has some nitrogen in the sediments, but the source is more than likely natural.
Anyone else? Mike?
Steve, you had talked about a project that was going on measuring boat traffic with water quality. They measured something in the water to see if there was a lake doing that. Can you explain what that is? That sounded kind of interesting.
You mean in fact, that hasn't even been published yet, but I can tell you, without writing it down, I'll just kind of give you a verbal overview. Lake Sylvia was interested in the impact of boats on water quality, and especially the oil and gas that had come from a boat or from, heavy boat use on a lake. And the question was there detrimental or hazardous chemicals and residue being put out by these boats? And so what we did is we went out and measured the lake 10 sites on July 1st and got a background reading. Middle of the week, low traffic, and then right after, the day after the 4th of July, and this July 4th weekend, it was a weekend. So July 5th or 6th, or a day right after the weekend, we're out to sample those same sites again to see if there was any elevated concentrations of gas, benzene. We looked at 30 or 40 different compounds, including combustion products, which are called PAHs, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, which are known to be carcinogens and come from combustion products and things like that. So And make a long story short, we didn't find any combustion products, and we were sampling right at the public access as well as other areas around the lake. And we didn't find any combustion products, and we found maybe one sample that had some benzene that was detectable, but not at a hazardous level. So the good news is that the boats these days seem to be running a lot cleaner or a lot more efficiently than maybe they were 50, 60 years ago when they were just spewing. You can look behind you, you could see a gas, trail basically. So good combustion, efficient engines, and that's where we are right now. And I haven't written that up yet, but I will. And when I do, I'll send you a copy as well.
Anyone?
Just a question. Back to the lake clarity. You made a good point how it kind of mapped to the zebra mussels. One thing that I've seen over the years is when we were crappie fishing, we'd always look for these big leafy like cabbage piles,
Yeah.
right? And if you found them in the spring, it's just starting to grow, that was the spot you went. 6-7 years ago, they were everywhere. And now there's hardly any of them. But there's a handful. I'm not going to tell you because you'll take my fish. But what do you account that to the lake clarity or the zebra mussels, or what would cause that?
You mean the cabbage?
Yeah, it's like that thick leafy stuff.
Yes.
It's just like over the past 6-7 years, it's just like completely disappeared.
That is a plant that comes and goes by decades.
Oh.
And it's white stem pondweed and also another potamogeton species. And they are, when they go down, another plant comes up. And white bear this last year, marsh marigold was very abundant. So depending on light, temperature, and all these factors, the seed bank is there for all these plants. It's just a matter of conditions. If the conditions are conducive that year to grow. And so they can come back next year. But they'll be around for a few years, and then they'll die back, and then another plant comes in. White stem pondweed is not quite as wide as the cabbage, but in bald eagle, for example, it was like one of the number one plants there. It came back out of nowhere, and we're getting calls for that. It looks a bit like curly pondweed, but it's not. It's a native plant. And so I would expect the cabbage to come back again. Water levels have probably had some impact on the light and everything else, as well as competition from the other native plants also. But the good news is the seed bank is there, and when the conditions are right, it'll come right back.
Super interesting. Thank you.
Okay, I have a couple questions for you, Steve. How do you sample for starry stonewort?
2 ways, or 3 ways. One is we use the same rake sample that we use, and we just scrape it on the bottom and then look at the rake. 2 is visual, because we have such clear water and starry is in those by the public accesses. It's only 3 or 4 feet. We can see clearly starry. We've done enough starry work now that it jumps out at you once you get that search image developed. And then so you can look at it visually. And then also we've been looking at snorkeling and with scuba diving. We're finding that for these early infestations, more often than not, rake sampling is probably as effective as almost anything. They all have their advantages and disadvantages, but rake sampling combined with the visual is pretty good.
And what are they using to treat at these other places?
Where we have a large infestation, we've been using a copper sulfate product. Copper sulfate, because it's really still an algae. It's a macroalgae, but it still works single cells. It has no roots and has no vascular tissue, no leaves. So copper sulfate, we've been using that in 4 or 5 lakes, including Lake Coronas. Some groups are considering to use a diquat or an endothol, which is a herbicide. But you can use that if you want. But copper sulfate has been very effective. And we have a little trick. So copper sulfate, when it goes into the water, spreads around. And it's an algicide. So it's supposed to kill the open water algae. But what we do, especially in these areas where it's a contained area by public access, we're making the applicator get a big tub of cool water, mix the copper sulfate into the cold water, then he applies it from there. So he's applying a cold water copper sulfate. Well, in the middle of the summer, when the water is 60 degrees and you're putting in water that's 45 or 50, it sinks. So because the slurry storm is going right on the bottom. So what's nice is that copper solution then, because it's denser than the surrounding water, sinks right down to the bottom. We get good contact and we get good control.
Okay, thank you. And then will you, I don't know that you talked about the last page 13, and I might have missed it. It's about sediment locations and the potential for milfoil growth.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sorry, if you touched on that, sorry, but so how do we measure sediment or so where did this information come from?
That's kind of a technique that I developed. I'm sorry, I handed out just a summary.
Oh,
What you're talking about is page 13 from the 4 reports.
oh, sorry.
And in fact, what we're doing, here's what we did. 1903, Professor Pound, believe it or not, his name was Pound, said, you know, these lake sediments are just like soils. And if they're conducive to growth, they're gonna go get a crop. And just like a farm field, you know, some soils will support corn and soybeans and others won't. And so we took that same concept and we started sampling lake sediments and looked at that as soils and looked at what kind of a soil composition you need to really produce a big crop, in this case, Eurasian milfoil. In fact, we took the sediment samples from White Bear to the University of Minnesota Soils Lab, their ag lab. So we use the same soil test on the lake sediments or soils as they do on agricultural fields. What we found is that another professor back in the 80s said, it looks like nitrogen is a big factor for heavy milfoil growth, for producing the abundant growth. And so we looked at, well, what's the threshold? So for a number of lakes where there was heavy growth, we sampled like crazy there, the sediments. And then in lakes where there was real light growth, we sampled those sediments, or soils, lake soils. And we came back and found out, wow, 10 milligrams per liter, or 10 milligrams per kilogram. That's the threshold. If you're greater than 10, then you get the real heavy milfoil growth. If it's less than 10, like 5, you'll get milfoil growing, but not to that heavy milfoil growth that we see. That's a real nuisance. So that's how we kind of worked that out. And this seems to work out. We've done a number of lakes now. And we have a pretty good database. It still seems to hold up. The other thing that limits milfoil growth is real soft, mushy sediments. They just can't grow very well or abundantly in sediments with greater than 20% organic matter on that threshold as well. So we are doing soil sampling. Oh, we just use an auger. We like those sediments. We use a soil auger, just put it on a great big pole, because they're only going down 10, 15 feet at the deepest. So we're just using a soil auger like they do out in a farm field, collect our lake soils, take them to the soils lab, and see what we got.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay, then last question for me, is anything you'd do differently next year?
I think we're on a good track here. One, the milfoil is being treated effectively, and I like the rotating herbicide idea too. We'll keep the resistant milfoil strains at bay for a long time. And so that seems to work out very well. Starry stonewort, we want to keep an eye on that. If we're going to do anything, we could look at starry stonewort a couple times a year, just in case it comes in over the course of the summer. But for sure, at the end of the summer, like in August, is probably a good time if we're going to do it once. So keep that under control. Then staff here, including Mike, have been keeping an eye on that yellow iris and on Phragmites. So those are the invasive species of concern right now. Curly pondweed, which is a big deal in a lot of lakes, is not too big of a deal. We kind of found out the sediments when we did the soil testing. This isn't conducive to real heavy curly growth. It'll grow in the lake, but it won't produce these acres and acres of matted curly growth.
Okay, so, yep, yeah.
Quick question. You mentioned the use of two herbicides. Is that
Yeah.
something that you recently started doing, or has this been a practice for many years?
Just in the last couple of years, I think, Mike.
Yeah, just the last maybe 3 years.
Okay.
And Mike picked up on, that at some of these conferences, they're trying to find resistance, just like you do on farm fields. They have to either change their herbicides up or add more herbicides. So we're trying to delay any type of resistant buildup from these different genotypes that are out there. That's a whole nother area.
Diane?
Have you taken a look at how effective copper sulfate is on swimmer's itch?
Yeah. Copper sulfate used for swimmer's itch, it'll last for a couple of days. And what happens often is that in the heat of the summer, when swimmer's itch is about as bad as it's going to be, we'll apply the copper sulfate. And that will close down the beach then for a day or two. What happens more often than not is the big pulse of swimmer's itch, all these little flukes that are swimming around, they're pretty much peaked and they're starting to decline anyway. The copper will kill the fluke, but the snails, that's where the flukes are coming from. And the life cycle is, from snails, these cercaria come up, they're looking for a warm-blooded duck. That's their next host. And if a swimmer's there, the fluke, cercaria, will hit the swimmer's leg or arm and start burrowing in because we're warm-blooded. So we're an accidental host. Fortunately, it can't get into our bloodstream like it does in a duck. And then it dies there. And that's what causes the itch. The dead cercaria that can't make it in. But you're looking for a duck. So the copper sulfate doesn't kill the snails, and they keep on producing these cercaria for about a couple of weeks, but they peak in the summer in terms of the number that they are extruding, and that is a decline. So copper sulfate is okay, it's temporary, it doesn't eliminate the swimmer's itch, but it can really reduce the intensity for at least a few days, especially during the peak season. Was it bad this year at all? Right there?
I heard a few
Yeah,
cases, several people.
We pay for the first treatment on the county beaches, and we there was a treatment done. So, and I don't know, the rule of thumb always seems, and maybe you can comment on that, is that usually by the 4th of July that cycle is done.
Yeah, or it's dying back down. Yeah, it's peaking at the end of June.
Yep.
And peaks. The snails put out the peak cercaria load between 12 and 2 o'clock. And that's good when we're swimming too. So the longer contact time, the more burden you get, as they say, and that gives you more itching, more cercaria.
Any other questions for Steve? Meredith?
Thank you. You've seen a lot of lakes around here start promoting the Adopt a Drain program to prevent leaves and other runoff from getting into lakes. Could White Bear benefit from something like that? Would we get bang for our buck if we started looking into that?
It wouldn't hurt. It wouldn't hurt at all. I think it's pretty cost effective. Fortunately for White Bear at this time, we have a relatively small watershed, which means there's not much drainage going in. So when we see a storm sewer, in some lakes, they have 1,000 storm sewers going in, draining a huge area. White Bear, the watershed is less than that watershed area is less than 10 times the area of the lake. So that's we still have a natural glacial setting. So that is to our benefit. But anything we can do to keep nutrients coming in incrementally, long run, it's a good idea.
I have one more question, if you don't mind. This wasn't in your report, but I'm just curious about it. Is White Bear at risk of developing blue-green algae?
Not really. We already have blue-green algae in the lake. But fortunately, because the nutrients are so low, they're not going to multiply and become dense enough to really be a potential problem or a pea soup type thing. Blue-green algae, cyanobacteria, they've been around for a couple billion years. They're pretty effective or efficient at getting in there and staying there. But fortunately, with the low nutrient concentrations we have, especially phosphorus, in the middle of the summer, the blue-green population is going to be there, but it's going to be a very low density. And even if there's any toxic blue-greens within that community, they're so scarce, they're not a problem to pets or to us.
Are we measuring the levels of blue-green algae?
No, we are measuring the levels of algae in the lake in general. And our levels of algae are so low right now that even with blue-green, even if the blue-greens were the dominant algae, they probably are in the middle of the summer, in August, those concentrations are low enough that we know that they're not going to be a potential toxic problem. Really what you need is, when your clarity gets 3 feet or less, we start getting concerned about potential problems from blue-green algae. And we're getting 15, 16 feet. So we have, and the clarity in White Bear is related directly to the amount of algae in the water. So we have 15 feet. We know we have very low algae, and we have been tracking the chlorophyll in the water, which chlorophyll is a measured component of the algae. So we know that as well.
Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, thank you, Steve, for coming out and taking some time to talk about our lake for us.
I'm sorry, I get going. I make these answers too long.
Steve,
I
yep.
think I have a short question, or a quick question and a short answer maybe. I've noticed I'm on Birchwood and the south shore of the lake, and I've noticed a reduction of the zebra mussels where I am, and wondering about that, but I also noticed an increase in the purple loosestrife.
Yep. Well, they're not really related. Purple loosestrife will do what it's going to do independently of anything else. But once we get our chlorophyll levels below 3, that is the food source. That's what zebra mussels use for food. They're filtering it. They're going to start dying off. So there's going to be some parts of the lake where zebra mussels are already starting to die back, and that's going to be one of the areas as well. So
If anyone else has seen that, but yeah.
they'll die back because they don't have enough algae to feed on.
Okay.
And so they die back, but then the algae will come up just a little bit. They'll come back, and then the zebra mussels will come back as well. And they'll take the algae back down, and then the zebra mussels will crash.
Okay.
So we have a classic, ecological predator-prey thing, and we're going to get these kind of oscillating populations.
And how about purple loosestrife? Is that causing a problem in our lake? Because I have seen a lot more of that.
It's not really causing a problem. It's not really as good for wildlife habitat as native grasses. So from that standpoint, we like to keep an eye on it. And if it gets really bad, there's some things we can do to control it. In fact, one of the things that they did over on Birch Lake is they had a big stand of purple loosestrife. They grew and added some weevils that ate the purple loosestrife and knocked it down. Sure.
Steve.
You're welcome. I think it's okay. I might just take off too.
Yeah.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Thanks a lot. Thanks for everything, y'all. Really, really appreciate it. Really enjoy it.
Me too. That was great.
Okay. So we're on to the second item of new business, which we added to the agenda. And I'll just set it up a little bit. So after the public hearing, we had a request from the City of White Bear Lake for a meeting just to clarify how things would be implemented. And so we met with the City of White Bear Lake, and we'll also meet with Tallies and with Docks of White Bear to make sure that everybody, gets their input in. But there were some items that came up that I think the board needs to address. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to raise these items tonight just for discussion, and then we will act on them in January with possible exception of one of these. So I'm just going to start. We've been assuming, I think, that the starting point for measuring how far a dock extends into the lake, we've been assuming, I think, that that's the ordinary high water level, but that's not actually stated anywhere in our ordinance. So that's something that the board will need to decide, is the ordinary high water level the point that we want to use for measuring, and if so, then we should beef up our ordinance a little bit to cover that. Okay, so that's one item. The next is that the ordinary high water level is an elevation, and so what someone would do is they would go along the shoreline and find that elevation, and they would say, okay, this is the point. And that may do this along the shoreline depending on whether there's a rock there or something else. And so it may be necessary for us, similar to what we've done in some other situations, to get together with the marina owners this first spring and designate the point that will be measured from. There may be some advantage to that so that everybody has the same understanding. But that's another thing that the board will have to think about. And then another item, how to confirm if the docks exceed the allowable distance. And I think if we were to set a point for the ordinary high water level, that would be the starting point, and then it's 300 feet from there. And a surveyor could easily determine that distance to confirm that this particular dock, whichever one it is within that 300 feet. But the board, I think, will have to make a decision of how best to do that and what kind of protocol we want to use. And then I should clarify, because this is, I've been using these interchangeably, but our ordinance currently, it says that it's the length of the ADUA that can extend 300 feet out into the lake. And the idea is that, well, the dock can't extend beyond the ADUA. But, we say the dock length, but it's actually the ADUA that our ordinance speaks about. Okay, and then another item is what action will the board take if somebody is out of compliance? There's potentially some concern that if I adjust my docks to be in compliance, but somebody else doesn't, is that fair? And is the board going to do something about that or not do something? And so I think that's another item that the board will have to have some discussion about. And then the last item is that because we have an October 15th deadline for submitting applications without penalty, now these applications will need to be adjusted. After, since our public hearing where we said we're not extending it past 300. So the applications will have to be adjusted. There's probably a reasonable amount of time that the board should provide for the applicants to get in a reapplication based on the 300 feet. And so the board, I think, should make a decision about that. And I think that's one item that we should act on tonight. And so those are the items that we discussed. And would anybody like to talk about any of these items tonight? And again, I'm not necessarily looking for decisions to be made on these. I'd rather just everybody kind of think about it a little bit, and then we'll act on these in January, because that will still be plenty of time. Again, with the exception of this application, and I'd like to get a motion on that tonight. So any discussion on any of that?
Yeah. So I think it's beholden on the owners to get a survey. If you've ever had a survey done, they're not inexpensive. And what usually happens in the past is if a survey needs to be done and we have to do it, if they're found, so say, for sake of argument, one of the other neighbors complains that dock is 310 feet past ordinary high water. Well, we go in, we tell them to do a survey, they say no. We go and do a survey, and then afterwards, if we find out that they are past where they're supposed to be, then they get charged for it. That's what sort of happened in the past. The other thing to think about is you look at some of these, and so say the city, and which I think they have their own surveyor, so I don't think they have a problem. So say some of the other docks, you would have to do a survey in front of each one of those fingers. So you can't just go, okay, we're going to go this one, and everybody has to stay inside this one because the shoreline moves in and out. So if you're going to request that, you're going to have to request that each finger has its own survey done in front of it. Those are just my points.
And one thing I'll add to that is that the city did offer their surveying services to measure the various docks in Commercial Bay, but there was maybe a little concern that their surveyor would need to go on private property to do the survey, and that makes them a little uncomfortable. You know, if I own a marina, I don't want them, like that. So that might not be an option. The other maybe concern is that would people accept the results if they come from the city? And so I think there's this idea that we just need to figure out, and I think part of that will come with these discussions that we have with these marina owners to see what their level of acceptance to that kind of thing would be. But worst case, we could put it back on the marina owners to hire a surveyor and tell us how far out their docks are. Get that from a surveyor. But that's again something that the board will have to decide early next year.
Brian, have you thought about suggesting a drone survey that would not impact anybody's private property because it would be in the air, and they're very accurate?
Yeah, and maybe that's a possibility.
That might be something that we could suggest to all the marina owners, just to share the cost of that. They wouldn't certainly be as expensive as a regular survey. We've had our dock, that's been done with our dock and our ADUA, and it wasn't terribly expensive, and it was very accurate.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, I think that's an accuracy thing that we'd have to get over. But yeah, that may be an idea that the board should consider.
That would take care of the private property aspect.
Yeah, agreed. Anybody else have anything on this that they would like to discuss?
Yeah, well, just one last thing. I think it's a conflict of interest for the city who completes directly business-wise with these others to tell them where their ADUHD is. If I was the others, I would not accept it because I'm in competition with you. Why would I accept your word?
And I think there's a risk of that. The good thing is that the ordinary high water level is a definite point that 10 surveyors ought to be able to come and find that exact same point anywhere along the lake. So that's one good thing. And I think another is once that's done and once these points are set, hopefully we wouldn't have, the same level of conflict or whatever in the future. But again, I think there's just going to be a little time when we need to get all the details worked out with the marina owners. Okay, anything else? Otherwise, I'm going to make a motion. I'm going to make a motion that we extend the date for submittal of the applications to our January meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that?
Has Kim let the marina owners know that their applications are not acceptable as they stand currently?
Not sure, but we could make sure that happens.
Because, that doesn't give them a lot of time to get it in if they don't even know that they're not in compliance with what we need them to be in compliance with.
Sure. But to that point, and I'll just comment on my own motion, is January enough time? Should it be February?
February.
I would say at least 2 weeks before the February meeting, because if you tell them before the meeting, they're going to turn it in that day, and we're not going to be able to see it. So we usually, with the other docks, with some of the association docks, that has to be turned in at least we have to send out letters to the neighbors 2 weeks before the dock comes onto the docket. So I would say they have to at least give us 2 weeks so the board can see it prior to the meeting.
And if that were the way it played out, February meeting is February 15th, and so that date would be February 1st. Which seems awfully clean. Okay, so I'm going to amend the motion to extend the date to February 1st. And I can't remember who was second. Is that okay? Okay, and the second is okay with that. So any discussion on that revised motion? Okay, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes, February 1st. Okay, so that's what I had for those items. And again, they'll be back in front of us in January. So next on the agenda is unfinished business. And these are two items that were discussed at the public hearing, and these are ordinance changes. So in the packet, there were two ordinance changes that were offered up, and I'd like to start, well, we'll start with the first one, the 2021-01, and this has to do with how to handle marina owners that exceed the number of slips that they're allowed by their permit. And I think everybody hopefully has this in front of them and they're familiar with it. Otherwise, I can read it. Okay. Is everybody comfortable that they have an understanding of the ordinance? Okay. The way that this will go, if we want to make this change, is that we would have a this would be the first reading of the adjustment to the ordinance, and then we could either waive the second reading and then it would be finalized, or we could have the first reading tonight and then have the second reading in January. If there's an idea that it would be beneficial to extend that out. So we'll start with this subdivision 2.1, and I'll just read it quickly. Any license issued under this ordinance may be suspended or revoked by the board of the district for violation by the licensee of this ordinance or any other ordinance of the district. The modification, any licensee that exceeds their permit number of slips will have that number of slips removed from their license for the following 2 seasons. And then back to the original. Action to suspend or revoke the license and then a change or reduce subsequent seasons' permitted slips shall not be taken by the board except upon at least 10 days prior written notice to the licensee, notifying the licensee of the time and place of the meeting at which the board will consider such suspension or revocation, and then new or reduction. At such meeting, the licensee shall be given a reasonable opportunity to be heard. Any proceedings to suspend or revoke a license, or, and this is new, to temporarily reduce subsequently permitted slips, and then back to the old, are not to be deemed to penalize the licensee for violations of the ordinances of the district, but shall constitute regulatory action of the district. So I'd like to make a motion that we revise our ordinance according with this change.
Second.
So we have a motion and a second. So any discussion? Mike.
Point of clarification, when it says slips, does that mean just the rented slips? Or does it include the transient slips? Or does it include the in-house slips, like when they have pontoon rentals and they have slips for that? So in other words, is it just the rental slips or is it all slips?
I think it's the slips that they would request in their permit.
Okay, so that would include all slips. Okay, got it.
So those numbers, do like pontoon rentals come in that number that they request?
Yes.
So it's like total boats that are there?
Boats,
yeah,
a boat.
Just boat.
The transients we don't count as
Right.
long as they don't, and we are going to require them to have things that no overnight tie-offs. But those we don't. But what we call is like a boat. I don't care if the owner owns it, if they're renting it out, or another company is using it to rent out boats as for a boat, rental company. A boat's a boat.
Got it.
Does that answer your question?
It does. And, we talked about this before. I mean, we still got to figure out how we police it too, right? Or count those numbers, right?
Agreed.
Okay.
As an example,
Yeah.
drone flights to check it a couple times a month or similar. But yeah, somehow we'll have to figure out how to get that accurate number.
Is that something for tonight, or is that a later discussion?
Later.
Okay.
Right now, I think it's the motion or the change is primarily what happens to folks if they don't comply.
Would, by voting for this motion, will we be suspending the second hearing?
That's a decision that the board will have to make. What we would do is we would have this be the first hearing. We have a motion and a second. We would take a vote on that. And if we decide that we want to waive the second hearing, then we would do that at that time.
Okay. So I guess the question in terms of, well, to be another motion, right? We could discuss it then. Okay.
Mike?
By a certain number of slips in the first season, they lose the slips the following season, I understand. But for the current season, they don't get any penalty?
So it's a question of whether our ordinance covers that already, or the permit covers that, and I don't know the answer to that, Mike. But somehow, currently, if someone exceeds the number of slips, what's the course of action that we would take?
Yeah, that's the question.
Okay, and maybe that's none. Maybe we have no, maybe we have nothing.
Yeah, I think they look at it as the crime's been committed, the penalty's in the future.
Okay, so
2 years.
Well, you mentioned for January discussion what action is taken if they're out of compliance. So.
Right. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to amend the ordinance in this way. Any further discussion? Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes. I'm going to make a motion to waive the second hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to waive the second hearing. Any discussion?
Doesn't the ordinance change have to be still posted in the paper or not?
True. So if good question, if we waive this second hearing, then we would advise Kim to print
Post
this.
it. So it's just to actually get it in the paper, make sure people can see it, and then they come back and complain about it if they had complaints.
It would only, yes, they could, and then the board would have to take further action if we wanted to on those. And Scott, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, we did discuss this at the hearing last month, and the question is, I mean, this only applies to, 4 or 5 licensees. Are they all aware of this already?
Well, I think they're aware that, wasn't this brought up at a previous meeting? I think they're aware that that there was a potential that it could happen.
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time this writing has been put out there.
True.
I guess I would do the second hearing, or the second reading.
Yep, got it. Okay, any other discussion?
But, I mean, do we really see the verbiage changing at all, though, if we do a second reading? Like,
there's a potential that it could.
Okay.
And I think that's the question that the board has to answer is, and I appreciate the point, Scott, but I think that each of us needs to make the decision, are we comfortable with this now, or would we like to think through this a little bit and maybe come back in January and reconsider it, or are we comfortable with this now? I think that's the question.
The one question I have to ask is, are we going to give the licensees an opportunity to withdraw those slips at the time that the occurrence happens? Do we give them an opportunity to get rid of those slips, or are we just saying, this has been done, you have this for the next 2 years?
I think it's the latter. That you were found to be in violation, you understood the ordinance, and so this is the consequence. That's what I think. I think that may come into the discussion about enforcement in January, the specific steps that would be taken, and if an opportunity to allow them to make it right, if we wanted to do that, I think that discussion would come in then.
Okay.
Okay, further discussion? Okay, the motion again is to waive the second reading of the ordinance change. So we have a motion and a second. We've had some discussion. I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes. Okay. And the next one has to do with markings on docks that are left in the water over winter. And this is similar in that we've had this proposed language, and we have the proposed language in front of us. And it's, and you can see, there's one, I think, some discussion about what the markings should look like. And I'll say that in the discussion with the city of White Bear Lake, one idea that came up was to take PVC pipe and cover it in reflective coating, reflective material, and then place that PVC pipe over the end posts on the docks, so that if somebody was out at night and their light hit it, they would see that reflection, and hopefully that would cause them some concern. That was an idea raised by the city of White Bear Lake. I think what I'll do is I'm going to make a motion so that we can have some discussion on this item. But I'm going to change the motion from what's in front of you, and I'll let you know where I'm going to make that change. Basically, in my motion, I'm going to take out the beacons. Okay. So I'm going to make a motion to amend section 3.01, subdivision 1, subdivision 1A. No dock, buoy, mooring, or other structure shall be so located as to 1, obstruct navigable waters, 2, obstruct reasonable use or access to any other dock, buoy, mooring, or other structure authorized under this ordinance, 3, present a potential safety hazard, or 4, come within 10 feet of any other structure. No dock, buoy, mooring area, or other structure shall be located or designed so that it unreasonably or unnecessarily requires or tends to encourage using it to encroach on any other authorized dock use area. And this is the new portion. No dock shall be left in the waters beyond the ordinary high water beyond December 1st without its vertical supports and terminus being clearly marked with reflective tape or paint visible to a distance of, I'm going to say 100 feet, to ensure their visibility to off-season winter users in the interest of public safety. And then the rest of the ordinance as it exists, mooring buoys must meet additional standards for size, color, and marking as specified by State of Minnesota Administrative Rule 6110.1500, which also requires that no buoy may be placed in state waters without first obtaining a permit from the sheriff of the county. That's the motion.
Okay.
We have a motion and a second. So any discussion?
Okay, so you said 100 feet?
I did.
And you said the and/or beacons?
That was eliminated.
Removed. Now, the only concern I have here is that we talk about the ordinary high water level now I can say that like in our group dock, we have we have got floating sections and they're stacked up on the shore, more or less, but I think they might exceed that ordinary high water level. I mean, they don't have posts at that time, right? But, that's can be fairly severe to say ordinary high water. And if you're saying no dock components or anything, I don't know, does that make sense?
Yeah, what do people think about that?
I think that Scott's right. I think that there's a number of lifts that are suspended kind of over the water in Birchwood that are as close to the shoreline as they can get because they've got walls there that would extend past the ordinary high water and probably aren't a threat because anyone using the lake shouldn't be within 200 feet of the shoreline in the winter. So or it seems kind of strict. And also when the lake was really low, I know people that had really shallow shorelines didn't drag their dock all the way up, 200 more feet. So I feel like this might be a little too strict when the water is low. And then for some people that have those immediate walls that leave their lifts that are probably past the ordinary high water, that probably aren't a threat.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the ordinance is left in the waters beyond the ordinary high water. So if they're on the shore, they're not in the waters.
Good point.
Does that cover your concern, or the point, I should say?
I think his concern is somebody coming down the road and saying it's floating, it's in the water, right? Because it's not up on shore, they're floating right now, correct?
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, do you say something, do you clearly mark, does that change to say you put reflective tape from the end of the dock in to a certain number of feet so it's, it tries to apply to what the problem we're trying to solve, right? Because it was the safety things for these long docks. Like, so for these longer docks, how do you put the verbiage in there to say mark it from the end of the dock in where it leaves a...
I like the verbiage that if it's in the water, you have to mark it.
Yeah.
Even if it's a floating dock section?
Yeah, it's in the water.
Okay.
It's on the ice.
So what does that mean, though? Do I just put tape on this floating dock, or on these longer docks, do I have to just put one at the end of the dock, or should I put it on every post coming in?
The way it reads is it's just the terminus, so it's just the end of the dock. But that covers, like something that has posts in it, I suppose. Although I guess it covers anything. I'm just thinking of them as having posts. But if it's just a floating dock section, I'm not sure how a person would mark those.
Put tape all over it.
You could just put, I almost brought one in. I think just a road cone would be fine.
Just a reflective thing.
As long as you don't let the snow go over the reflective part, because you can see those from really far away at night. You know what I'm talking about? Just the orange cones with the big Scotch Guard or Scotch Brite around it. Like, just make an effort. I mean, we had the same thing happen out at the end of the peninsula. I mean, I don't want to get too in the weeds. It has to be this, and it has to be that, and it has to be that. But just do something rational. If we need to tighten these up in a year, if we have more problems, more snowmobiles smashing into docks,
right,
then I think we have to worry about it at that point. But right now, all we're trying to say is we don't have anything that gives anything for people that are leaving stuff in the lake over the winter, and that we just want to be responsible and say, look, at least put some kind of reflective warning to people that there's something in the lake that's, you're not used to because it's winter. We're not used to seeing docks in the lake. If you're going to store something in the lake, then demarcate it. That's it.
Yeah, well, I'm wondering, this ordinary high water level is really, it's like a DNR definition, right? And what does it really have to do with being in the lake or not?
Should we change that, or would it be a good idea to change that to
Shoreline?
shoreline?
Left in the waters.
Yeah.
Just leave the ordinary high water out and just say left in the waters beyond December 1st. So it's easy to go out and go, look, there's ice here. We can scrape off the snow, and that's sand, rock, or grass.
Okay.
So that would, so I'll amend the motion to remove beyond the OHW. And is that okay? Second?
Yeah.
Second.
Yep.
If it's left in the waters, then you got to mark it.
Yep. Okay. So, Mike?
And then you also eliminated and/or beacons?
True. That was
Yes.
not part of the motion. Okay. Any other? Yeah, Susie.
I'm wondering if you want to say beyond the shoreline rather than the waters?
Yeah, let's talk about that. The shoreline is a defined.
Yeah, that's a defined
where the
line.
water hits the shore, so that would vary, I think. What do people think about that? Using the shoreline as opposed to just saying in the waters.
I liked what Mark said. You come up and you scrape the snow off. You know exactly where it is. If
In
you're
the
on dirt,
waters, is that what you said, Chris?
Yeah, I like what Mark said. If it's the dirt, it's the dirt. You put it there, and you know it's up on shore. Because then there's too much variable there.
I think it's adequate to just say in the waters.
Okay, and one other thing, Susie, is that we can always adjust this in the future if we find that it'd be beneficial to make it a little more this way or that way.
Well, I guess what I was thinking too, though, is the idea that Meredith brought up, that there are things that are extending over the shoreline into the area where the water is. that has the potential for, snowmobilers to hit. It might not be in the water, but it is on top of the water.
Like cantilevered over the water?
Correct.
Elevated above the water.
And how,
There's a few lifts like that in Birchwood.
I think you'd have to mark them somehow so that you would avoid having people run into them.
But that's a permanent structure. We're talking about storage of things
No,
on the
it's not a
lake.
permanent structure, Mark.
What he does is he cranks them because there's
Crank
no
'em up.
shoreline. He's got one of
Oh.
those big concrete walls, so it's cranked up, and that's all he's got for storage. So he just cantilevers them out, keeps them out of the water, and that's it.
Okay.
But it's
Creative.
It's hanging over the waters, or it's beyond the water's edge.
But it's up like, it's 8 feet. I don't know if somebody's going to be snowmobiling that close either, right? But
Some of it is, not all of it is.
I think it's mainly for if you can hit it with a snowmobile. Like if you don't realize it's there, and you come, and granted you shouldn't be within 200 feet, but if you do and you come screaming in at 50 miles an hour and hit it, you're in a lot of trouble. So
Mike?
Like you say, no dock or lift shall be left in the waters?
I just like storing of anything.
So here's where I'm at with the motion, is I'm inclined to leave it the way we have it at the moment. That's where I'm inclined, and so we have a motion and a second with the modification that we removed beyond the OHW. But one other thing I'd like to talk about or ask about is the 100 feet. Is 100 feet adequate? It's basically.
How do you determine what? Yeah, I mean, again, you're going to get in the weeds and you're going to get into a lot of legalese on what's 100 feet, what it should be. Should it be 100 feet? We have to do a lot more research. I would scratch the distance too.
and then just say ensure their visibility of off-season winter. Just take it out.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, can you say that again, Chris?
Well, you struck out the beacons, but like what Mark's saying, take out the distance and say just to ensure the visibility of the off-season winter users, right? Just ensure that they're visible. And then if it doesn't take care of it, then you got to put distance in and do some tests. And
exactly, like how do we know it can be seen by 100
you
feet?
bring the weed professor back. He was brilliant.
Is it with a flashlight? Is it with a mag light? Is it with
The concern. Any?
I was just going to say, I think you need to have an amount in there. Yes, 100 feet is different from me versus the rest of us based on our eye quality. But at least, if you don't have nothing in there, then it's
Seems like somebody could set an orange.
visible from 1 foot. So I think you need to have a number in there. Yes, it is. It can be argumentative, but a number is better than.
Good point.
Just reflective tape, if you go buy 3M reflective tape at the hardware store, is it rated on how far you can see it at night? If it's not, you just say you need reflective tape.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah, I think that, Mike?
100 feet, like you mentioned, is not bad because then you would put a sufficient amount of reflective tape or paint on what you're doing at what you would estimate would be 100 feet. In other words, it won't be just a little postage stamp piece of reflective tape. It'll be enough that it will show.
Good enough.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. And the ordinance at the moment, the only change that has been made from the original motion was to remove beyond the OHW.
And beacons.
That wasn't part of the motion.
Oh.
So the only thing that was removed from the motion was beyond the OHW. So I'm going to call the vote on that motion, unless there's any further discussion.
So you're going to leave beacons in?
No,
Okay.
it wasn't in the motion to begin
It
with.
wasn't in the motion to begin with. I took that out, Mark.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
I'm with
when
you.
I read
I'm
it.
with you. It's been a
Okay,
long day.
so again, the only thing that's been removed is beyond the OHW. No further discussion. We have a motion and a second, so I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the ordinance change, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. So on to the second reading. I would like to hold the second reading in January on this item. But does anybody feel strongly about that? Well, what I should say is anybody can make a motion to waive the second reading if you'd like to do that. Okay, then we'll have the second reading in January. Okay. All right, thanks everybody for your patience with that. Okay, so we're on to reports and action items. And first is the executive committee. The executive committee didn't meet, so no report there. So lake quality, Mike?
Lake quality, lake level today was 923.26. That's down less than an inch from last month. Lake temperature is 40 degrees. So if you get up tomorrow and it's 28 degrees, go jump in the lake, warm up. That's it.
Any questions for Mike? Thank you, Mike. Lake Utilization Committee, Mark?
I'd like to start by saying that nobody showed up to the Lake Utilization Committee except for the members. The first one we're going to go through is Fletcher Driscoll. That's no change from last year, and I move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion?
It looks like on their permit they overpaid by $60.
They paid $720, it looks like. Yeah. And
But shouldn't they have only been paying for 10 boats if they had 14 boats? Should have been $660. It's a minor point, but
well, let's. So if they have 14 boats, I'm sorry, Meredith.
shouldn't they only be paying for 10 of their
Correct.
boats if they have 14? And they were paying for 11, unless they're paying a late fee, and I just didn't notice that.
We'd have to check with Kim.
So application fees, each approved slip over 4. Oh, so that they put 660, but that should have been 600. Right.
It seems like it.
Yeah, right on. Okay, so here's what I would say is I think we can, we have a motion and a second to approve. We have had some discussion. I think we can still approve it, and then we can ask Kim to straighten out the finances. Diane, what do you think?
That would be good.
Okay, so any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. All right. And Kim, please take care of the $60 overage. There. It's in the minutes.
The next one is the White Bear Yacht Club, which we chose to table. It was brought up by somebody. They have 21 for rent and lease, and it's a commercial operation. So we need to get some information on whether, because I know on other associations, they do charge you more if you keep a boat than if you don't keep a boat. And if these are private members, if you're charging them marina fees, then that's a commercial operation, so they should be charged more for their rental slips. If not, so we have to, they weren't here tonight, so we couldn't work that out with them, so that's being tabled. The next one,
Cottage Park.
Cottage Park, that was also tabled. What was the reason I tabled?
Well, they said they would change something in it, didn't they, for Cottage Park?
Yeah, it wasn't clear, I think.
Yeah, it
what
said
the
there was a change request. Thank you. It said there was a change request. The only change I could see was one went from boat to pontoon, which I don't know if that's a difference for us, but other than that, I couldn't see anything. But I just want to verify before we approve it what the change was.
There was a dock configuration that's been the same way.
It seems the same. So normally when we have our meetings and Kim is here, she gives us last year. So when we come, even if they say no change, we've caught a lot trying to go through with no change from last year, and there is. And we didn't have that opportunity this year. So that's why a lot of these are going to be tabled, because if they weren't here to answer the questions, then we didn't feel comfortable just pushing them through. The next one is Scott Bonin. That one was also tabled. I believe that one was the fact that it looked like in the drawing one they didn't have any their diagrams delineated, like measured, so we couldn't tell what the shoreline was, and it looked like the two boats behind the first four boats couldn't get out without going out of their ADUA. So that was a question. The next one that got tabled was Derek Ski. He had on his that he only wanted 5 boats, although he had 6 on his diagram. So we had some questions about that. The next one, White Bear Lake Special Olympics, that's the polar plunge. We move to approve and waive the fee as it's for charity.
Second.
Barely open.
Also, thank you. I have that in my notes. Thank you. Also, I want to put another caveat. They will have to provide us the insurance prior to the event.
And did somebody second that motion?
I did.
Okay, Meredith, are you okay with that?
I am.
Okay. And that's just because they renew on January 1st, so they'll give us their new one after that. So a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Is this the barely open, or is this the polar plunge?
Polar plunge.
Plunge.
For Special Olympics.
And again, just the motion included that the fee would be waived. Okay, motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, that passes.
Next one on the agenda is the Barely Open. That's the golfing, I guess you'd call it a tournament. And that's for the local food shelves. So since it's for a charity, I move to waive the fees, but move to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve and waive the fee. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Next one is ESDA, that stands for East Shore Dock Association. That is on the Matamidi Beach. That one will have to be brought to the board because I have to abstain as I'm a member.
So, yeah, so this one, there were only two people at the, two members on the LUC, and so they couldn't take action on it because Mark has to abstain. Thank you. Is there any difference in this from last year?
No change from last year.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Any discussion?
Yeah, I got a couple points. Just to be transparent, when I came on the board, one of the neighbors reached out to me specifically on this. This was Steph Schrankler.
Yep.
I coach her daughter. That's the only reason. That's the relationship. When I saw it, I read Guy's cover letter, right? And it just sparked a couple things where it's like, it seems like the neighbors are in agreement. I just text her, you guys in agreement? And she called me right away. Where it seems like there's just not enough communication between the neighbors and the board, where she didn't even know who the president was of the association. If she's right or wrong, I'm indifferent on it. I'm just giving the feedback on it. I think her biggest problem was the angle of the slips. She actually had people run into her dock last year, where I think the board and the neighbors, they just got to get into some kind of agreement to make sure that those things are angled the right way. Now, I don't know if that's kids driving the boat or what, but I think the board's got to get in more of a discussion, specifically with the Schranklers and probably some of the other board members or other neighbors, to make sure they're on the same page with some of that stuff.
A couple points on that. We don't go out every time something happens and tell the neighbors. So if they want to contact or know who to contact, all they have to do is call the White Bear Conservation District.
And so that's what I told her too. I said, I think the other thing that's got to come out of it is like the neighbors need to be educated a little more, because I think they feel like the easement is like 25 feet. That was one of the comments that came out.
It's 100 feet.
Right, I agree. So when you read the permit, it says 75, right?
Plus the 25
Plus
behind.
the 25. So it's like, I think education can go a long way there, because I think there's some angst or there's not clarity on what does the easement really own, right? And I think if clarity's there, that's going to clean it up. Where, when I was at Birchwood, it was always just educating the neighbors, making the peace, and making sure that everybody was on board on it. And if there's a problem, they go fix it, right?
And that's what we tried to do this year. We did get contacted about a canopy, and we resolved that because one of the neighbors contacted us.
Yeah.
So
I think that's good. It looks like you put it in the bylaws.
Yes. It used to be a handshake,
right?
And then we had some new neighbors.
And it's so now, is that going to cause a problem? It sounds like there's one guy that still gets it though.
What do you mean?
It's like when I read his cover letter, there's still a standing verbal agreement between the Grays, WBL, and the neighbors. Like, are the neighbors on board on that one?
So the Grays are traditionally, the Grays could, if they want to, put another dock behind our dock. They have two easements, one on the 75, one on the 25.
Got it.
So we sort of, and sadly, Mr. Gray passed away last year, and Mrs. Gray's not putting a boat out.
Right. So it's not even a problem. It's just keep people happy. Yeah, I think the biggest ask, and it's probably education and getting an agreement with the board and the neighbors and making sure, on those dock flips, if they're angled wrong, if they truly feel it's wrong and people are backing into it, we make sure that it's taken care
I will let our president know.
Yep.
And I will have him contact them.
And I was going to go reach out to either him. I didn't have time to reach out to Guy, and I can reach out to him too, and even the neighbors, and say, hey, start talking. Right?
You know what? Being that I'm on, that would be great.
I'll do it. Yep.
I appreciate that. You have his contact?
I'll find it. You can give
it's
it
probably
to me.
there. It's there on the
It's on the application. But I think that will go a long way, especially with the neighbors where, they say there's confusion. I get it, but there's two to dance, and I think we just got to get them on the same page.
Agreed.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? And thanks for picking that up, Chris.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. That passes.
The next one, the John Redpath Ski Slalom Course. We moved to approve with some caveats. The first one is that every once in a while there are some issues, and if anybody else can have a discussion, but that when they move it, they contact us. One of the problems is it's supposed to be moved twice a month within 3 weeks, no longer than 3 weeks, and it's been reported that it's been out there longer. So we would like Mr. Redpath to contact us every time it's moved so we can keep a log and know exactly when it's moved or how long it's been there. And the second was that to assure that the gate buoys in the front and back, that they do have the White Bear Lake Conservation District number on them, and that if they get taken out and replaced, that is put back on them so somebody can know who to contact if they have a problem with that ski course. And I so move.
So Mark moved for approval,
Move for approval.
Second.
and we have a second. So a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay, and the motion included those items as well, right?
Correct.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. And that passes.
Thank you.
Any questions for Mark? Okay, thank you, Mark. Okay. Lake Education Committee, Scott?
Yeah, I don't have anything. Meredith, you have anything?
Nothing tonight. Our social media continues to gain followers and likes, and I'll keep it up.
All right.
One thing I heard that I'll just throw out is that, it sounds like it was a good idea to put out that Steve McComas was coming tonight on Instagram, but maybe we didn't put where it was going to be, something like that, so maybe just in the future. And thanks for all you guys are doing on the Lake Education Committee. Any questions for Scott and or Meredith? Okay, thank you both. And Treasurer's Report, Diane.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Treasurer's Report for November 2021. I'd like to make a motion to accept checks 4731 through 4734.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve those checks. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Thank you. Since we don't meet in December, we just usually present to you an estimate for the Treasurer's Report for December 2021, and this would not be the final Treasurer's Report, and that you will see in January, but I would just like to make a motion to accept this December estimate, and I so move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the estimate for the December's report. And again, just to clarify that this will be formally approved at our January meeting. So we have motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. Any questions for Diane? Okay, thank you, Diane. Board Council report, as mentioned, Alan isn't here tonight. Announcements, Kim isn't here tonight. And so we're on to item 10.
So moved.
that we adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn, and is there a second?
Second.
Second. Motion and a second to adjourn. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you all for coming out tonight and hanging in there.
See if she needs anything. Usually we put stuff out.
Oh, yeah, thanks for that.
Make sure we-